This is a fireside chat, Bill, and one thing I just observed, there's no, I don't know how you feel about this, but there's no fireplace. But
yeah,
we'll have
that's
to
fine.
make do.
Totally good.
We'll have to make do.
Yeah.
So, one thing I think that's really relatable to that I want to open this with is in this space, everyone's traveling around so much. We can't really see anything right now, just so they know. But I bet in a show of hands, everyone's been on, at least 5 to 50 flights here. You have too. You've been all over the world. I think one thing that's on top of everyone's mind is your relationship to one of the earliest blockchain conferences. And you were just a few months ago in Morocco.
Yeah. Yeah, about 5 years ago, I cooked up something actually off of a kiteboarding trip. I used to do 2 kiteboard trips a year to Necker Island with Sir Richard Branson. And the January trip, there was one in January, one in June. The January trip turned into a startup competition now called the Extreme Tech Challenge, which is running. And we have the finals there coming up in October. And the June trip turned into something called the Necker Blockchain Summit. And actually, I was in Morocco because a hurricane ripped through the Caribbean last year, and Necker was closed. So we had to move the conference for a year. And Richard happens to have another place in Morocco in the Atlas Mountains called Tamadat. So we held the conference there.
And let's get to Morocco in a second. But as a courtesy to Sir Richard, how's Necker doing now? Is it kind of recovered?
They've been rebuilding it, and it opens on October 14th.
Okay.
With us. So we're going to be there October 14th for the week, and have the finals to the annual startup competition on the 19th.
Yeah, come hell or high water, no pun intended.
Yeah.
So that's a great segue, though. I told us to hold a thought on Morocco. It's, at least from the last time I checked, 4th wealthiest country in Africa, but still has a lot of disparity. And there's a lot that you've seen over your career. For those of you who don't know, Bill, in an earlier life, built a company that had to work with a huge array of governments in Asia. And what is the genesis? What are these conferences about now? There's more than just making as much money as possible.
Yeah, so the reason that got started, so I think some of you guys know, I started mining somehow in 2009. There's a whole story to that too. And around 2010, 2011, I started to buy Bitcoin. I ended up acquiring some from a go-to person in Finland, a wonderful guy that dropped out of school, and he was just an expert in mining. And he ended up meeting a couple folks online that taught each other how to move from laptops to graphics cards to FPGAs and ultimately silicon. That company became Bitfury. And
you're referring to Valerie.
Yeah. I'm the person that ended up writing the check to fund their silicon in that age. So I'm still on the board of Bitfury and have been for years. It's turned out to be quite one of the main anchor tenants in the business. And we were on Necker Island together at one of my outings in January, and just kind of grappling with this notion that there should be more to what was happening than just Bitcoin running on this transport layer of the blockchain. So I said to George Kikvadze, if you know George is the vice chairman of Bitfury, and Val, who were there with me, I said, we need to highlight that there's a whole nother aspect to this thing. And by the way, this is before Ethereum had even been launched. I mean, Vitalik was raising money around that time, so it was literally just, there were some other crypto-related things, but it was primarily Bitcoin. And I think because of the origin of Bitfury having been kind of Eastern Europe and perceived as a Russian company, even though it wasn't, there was a sort of an aura around that company that wasn't accurate, that it was a Russian Bitcoin mining company, and it wasn't. And I said, guys, you guys are such good people, and there are so many things we're supporting. We need to highlight that. So let's take this and turn the discussion from Russia and Bitcoin mining to blockchain for social good. And then so I got Richard's permission to take a couple of days of our next kite trip and throw a forum. And highlight social applications for blockchain that could be used for the greater good of this planet.
And it has an absolutely massive impact.
Yes.
Right, and that's something that I want to make sure that we establish here. Heretofore, a lot of ways you could participate in philanthropy or charity is largely giving money away, foundations. There's a lot more to it, and let's unpack that a bit. One of the statistics that you put in one of your Medium posts and is elsewhere is 167 trillion with a T in provable assets around the world, and a lot of those are in relatively impoverished countries where if those populations could participate in that, they could unlock all sorts of stores of value, ultimately start businesses, increase the number of economic smiles throughout those countries. Tell us that evolution and how that relates to blockchain.
Yeah, so this all started with, some of you probably have heard of Hernando de Soto, the economist who wrote the book Mystery of Capital. And when I was running around the world, the story he referred to was in 1994, I started an ISP, and I bought a couple of routers, flew them out to Taiwan originally, and set up the first privately owned, kind of substantially privately owned internet there. And that ended up growing to be internet networks and data centers over 12 countries in Asia. And it went public. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Salomon Brothers took it public, I guess now, 19 years ago. But during that period, I read the book Mystery of Capital, which is the Mystery of Capital. Basically, to summarize it, it's about defining the fundamental building block of capitalism, which in Hernando's opinion written in that book was clear title to ownership. If you think about the position in developing markets of a squatter versus somebody that owns their property, the squatter is basically trying to take what he can get as fast as he can take it out of the land, and if the authorities come, they run away. If you own a piece of property, you want to make it better, for one, and if you have clear title, you can take that title and take it to a bank, effectively, and get a mortgage. So you have the foundation of capital that you can then invest, create a business, and then build and grow your property. So that book had a tremendous impact on my psyche, because here I was setting up networks in countries with varying degrees of rule of law, and the notion of clarity of ownership, it was so apparent the countries that had it moved a lot faster and further than those that didn't. So anyway, the first Necker Blockchain Summit was built around Hernando and the concept of taking what he had done, abstracting his brain, and turning it into a program. And I got a couple of developers to basically take the paper-based process that he used in a lot of countries. He's created economies in 15 nations and turned it into an iPad app where you could actually have an Egyptian soldier, for example, go to a slum and take a picture of the person, take their thumbprint with the iPad, GPS locate it, go to a map, send the data to a validation server, the government could say yes or no, and then you had clarity of title on the blockchain. That idea has now migrated to the tokenization of assets in the subsurface. So beyond just owning the property that you own on top of the land, a lot of these countries, like his home country of Peru, that one is a mining area. So there's lots of interesting, raw materials that sit in the subsurface. You think about things like oil drilling and fracking in the United States, right? You have the topsoil, but a lot of people will drill sideways to get to, other assets. How do you know, where the boundaries are? So the blockchain and tokenization is actually a natural for trying to then come up with a way to securitize in a way or share the mineral rights to properties, where a lot of things in Peru and other places, they get stopped. A big miner comes in and you have Native America, the native indigenous population fighting it because they feel like they got ripped off because there wasn't clarity. Anyway, so it's kind of a first step towards providing clarity, transparency, granularity.
Yeah, and you touched on a few technology points, and let's set those aside for a moment. Just to establish, the level of awareness, because a lot of this audience is relatively Western. We take for granted fairly very strong intellectual property rights, very developed court systems where we know if there's a promise, and we'll do a quick example of that now. I promise to give you this box of chocolates later, Bill. Do you accept?
I accept,
He said,
sure.
and we've made a contract here, and we've made a contract here that Bill can then enforce against me in a court of law. And Bill, that's not necessarily the case in a lot of countries,
No.
even still today.
Yeah.
And that's a massive impact. Now, this is a petty, silly example, right, Bill? But that's massive when it comes to, for example, drilling rights, mining rights. I think you've heard in
Sure.
DeSoto's case with Peru. And they don't get to take for granted any of that organizational legal structure or any of those
Laws are
properties.
arbitrary, and so in some countries, you're always afraid and you keep two sets of books, right? You've got your cash books that you keep for yourself, and then the books that you show to the government officials, because if you're doing well, any local politician can basically take your business away.
And that's creating massive uncertainty.
Yeah, it's a great suppressant on economic growth, which is, I think, why, mystery of capital and clarity of ownership and title and rule of law makes such a big difference. And it's produced the economic, if you think about the GDP per capita here, part of the reason is we have clear rule of law.
Yeah, well, for the most part, right?
Yeah, and a
As
guy
much
that
as
wants to take that away, but anyway, it's still there.
There's always debate. It's always a struggle. Well, let's talk about some of the consequences of that, because this really is a conversation about social impact. Blockchain is potentially a technology here that can be used as, if anything, like an icebreaker
Yeah.
to finally plow through what could be very thick ice, calcified
Sure.
organs of government that prevent this wealth creation. What are some of the most kind of spirited examples where you see some real promise, not just a nugget, but actual traction where this could take off?
Yeah. Well, actually, so to go back to the foundation of why that is. Okay, so Jordan mentioned that I've been investing as a venture capitalist since 1991, so quite a long time. And I've participated in a bunch of different waves of technology. First, there was a silicon wave, which is sort of taking transistors and making them more usable. And then there was an equipment wave of making, PCs, routers, systems, chip, whatever, take the chips, make boxes. Then there was another wave of putting the boxes together into networks, modern day internet. And in another wave, which is the UI layer, which is, Facebook, Google, there are ones and zeros coming at you off a network, so it's how you organize those. And then data science, right? So we've had all these things that are technology for technologists, finally a consumer level application. This is the first wave that touches the organization of society. So if you think about what a cryptocurrency is, a cryptocurrency is essentially an element that enables the economic alignment of interest of a community of interest, right? So it's taking a technology layer and allowing voice across small, flexible groups of people in a fabric that can be peers and express a voice and a way to see what's happening with the consensus of that group. So because of that, now you're able to both organize assets, organize opinion, and drive change. So now to your question about where can that be applied, a couple of the projects that I've been working on. One that I love. So he mentioned Acti, which is it's a nonprofit. It's primarily focused on ocean conservation. I'll get into a little bit more about what Acti is later. But one of the projects that I just undertook, I'm one of the backers of CryptoKitties. And CryptoKitties, I think all of you have seen, they have these little cats. It was a breakout thing on the internet, in the crypto community. It really only started in November. Despite the price drop, they've probably done about $30 million worth of transactions in 10 months or so, which is not bad for an emerging company. But those are just digital cats, right? They don't represent anything. So I had a conversation with the management team about taking what they did to apply it to real life. And I did a little bit of a test off of the Morocco Blockchain Summit. I launched a unique, they have 721 standard, unique digital assets. I launched one that was basically a unique cat with a turtle shell called Hanu Kitty, where we tied, it was done as an auction where we took the proceeds to fund Sea Shepherd and Unite BVI and a turtle project. So we sold that cat. It got auctioned for $25,000. Some of those proceeds went to Operation Gyro, where there's actually a ship that's going to sit off of a beach in Antigua during the nesting season to prevent people from, killing or stealing or eating the turtles. And so one of the things that I'd like to extend that to in real life, imagine taking communities of interest and tying their interest to real-life animals. So Richard Branson, for example, has a ranch, a safari ranch down in South Africa. He's got 5 rhinos, 10 elephants, a bunch of giraffes. They're uniquely tagged. We could take those, launch those, and people in the audience, you could buy that animal and get a tax deduction for that support. And I'm working with Conservation International on that idea too. There's actually a website. If you go to Conservation International, you can see real-time GPS traces of whale sharks. So you have a number of whale sharks in Indonesia, and it costs money to prevent the poaching and to preserve and protect those things. So there's ways to now drive massive community of interest around the world to specific individual animals to preserve species that most of which have, 90% of the destruction of non-human life on this planet has happened in your generation. And so to be able to have a little bit of a counterforce to that is a good thing.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing those examples. There are a lot of causes that people care about. One of the core principal ones is the human element. Going back to all of our collective awareness, one of the things that you've been able to benefit from was your experience with organs of government elsewhere that operated differently. You've also had, especially including more recently, exposure to people who could benefit from blockchain, who certainly wouldn't have the privilege of being in this audience. What does the litmus look like for them? Is there an awareness of the potential for this technology to impact people's lives?
I think it depends on where you are. I think while blockchain can be a pervasive tool across the globe and across industries, because it is a digital technology that comes off computers and mobile phones, effectively, you have to have at least some touch point there. So I guess the good news there is that mobile phones, we're in a generation now where there literally are billions and billions of mobile phones out there. And in many countries, there's even a place like Egypt, there are more phones than people. So I think there are a lot of areas that didn't have basic landline telephone infrastructure that now have people capable of touching the internet and therefore Bitcoin blockchain, or not just Bitcoin, but blockchain in general. And so I think we're right at the cusp, I think, of technology being pervasive enough. And I'm co-founder, chairman of a company called Treasure Data that was just acquired by SoftBank. SoftBank, everybody knows SoftBank. People may or may not know the company that they acquired a while ago called ARM Computer Systems. ARM is the maker of the CPU that's in every one of your smartphones. You probably have one. You have one definitely, actually 7 of them or more in your iPhone, in your Android phone. You have them in your car engines, in your washing machines and microwave ovens. They're in every Arduino, every Raspberry Pi. They ship 15 billion of those a year, and they have 125 billion active, right? So Treasure Data is going to be effectively the iCloud to that back end, where we're kind of the data collection and the base for machine learning and AI on top of that. So long as there's a little CPU core associated with a person somewhere or a device that person owns, there is going to be an ability to register all of those things on an identity fabric that is the blockchain. Just like websites are, have a URL and an identity through ICANN.
Thanks. Bill, that's all the time we have.
Okay.
We appreciate it. Everyone give it up.